What's up, everybody? Today we have a viewer game analysis um, that was submitted to me by someone in my Discord. They played an over the board game, 25-minute plus 5-second increment. The black side, his opponent is rated 1691 over the board, so he's pretty strong. So let's get into the game and see what happened and see if we can give white any tips. So white opens up with e4. Black opens up with e5. Nothing to say here. White goes knight f3. This threatens an attack on the pawn. Black goes knight c6, defending the pawn, developing towards the center. The game can go many different ways. White chooses to go c3. This is the Ponziani opening, and it's kind of a tricky opening for both sides if you don't know what you're doing. So as white, if you're going to play it, you probably should know a little bit of theory. So black goes d5. What does this threaten? It threatens an attack on white's only central pawn. It also is a strong pawn duo. So on the last turn, white goes c3 because he wants to play d4 and have two pawns in the center. And yet, black is the one who gets two pawns in the center. So that's why this opening is a little weird, but it's still playable if you make, if you follow it up correctly as white. So what's black's threat? Well, black is attacking this pawn, which is undefended. So that's kind of a big threat. Really important, actually. You can't just let him take that and hit the knight. So as white, you really only have like one. I mean, there are multiple moves, but theory suggests, let's see, not queen c2. So you play queen c2, which defends the pawn, but it's too passive here. You're white, and this move defends the pawn with a queen, which is easily susceptible to attacks from his pieces. And you need to play more aggressive here because you can't let black take control of the center here when he's the one who should be groveling for it because you're white. So you're really supposed to play queen a4 here. It's an important move to play here, and the reason you move it here is to pin the knight. And what does this do? This fights for the center. So queen c2 defends the center. Queen a4 defends the center but fights for the center because it pins the knight. What does that mean? That threatens the e5 pawn, right? I can take this pawn if he lets me because his knight's pinned. And so this is a much more aggressive, I guess, accurate move. And the idea is, just in case you're not familiar with, let's say, theory, is if black does, let's say, a natural bishop move, breaking the pin, hitting the queen, not only were you threatening this pawn, but you're also threatening e takes d in this position. So you're threatening both the central pawns. So when he goes to block, you still can take this pawn on d5. And if you're ever scared about his knight jumps, it's good to know ahead of time that his best knight jump, which is this one, right, creating a discover on the queen, is no big deal. This appears in different openings. All you have to do is retreat the queen back home, and then again, his best move is to just trade knights, and you take with the queen. So there are no good discoveries is the point. So you don't have to be afraid of bishop d7. So that's why you play queen a4. Okay, so you don't play queen a4, you play queen c2. And so even though it's still somewhat even game, even though you made mistakes later in the game, I would say that this right here, move number 4, is the start to all of your problems. I would say even though this looks like just a solid logical move, this move is actually extremely hard to play from now on for white, because black's going to be able to control the center, and this is always going to look kind of funky as a backwards pawn if you don't get to push it. So seemingly harmless queen c2, but I think it's kind of a big mistake. He takes the pawn, which makes a lot of sense because now you want to take back, obviously. But now your queen's in the center, so it's susceptible to tempo moves. And so that's why queen c2 wasn't as accurate. So black develops the knight, hits the queen. Perfectly logical play by black this whole time. Push pawn in the center, develop the knights. You can't really blame anything. So you have to move the queen here as white. Now, black has control of the center. I think it's very important to see that he controls all of this, and he's forcing your queen to move. And you don't have any pawns in the center. So when you move your queen, he's going to have this move e4, which is going to displace your knight. And that's going to be devastating because your knight doesn't have good knight jumps and anywhere really to go. So it's extremely important not to underestimate the e4 pawn push. You go back to c2. Out of harm's way, what looks like a safe square, but I feel like you're severely underestimating the e4 pawn push and the consequences. Yes, it attacks your knight. It obviously doesn't win it, but where are you going to move your knight? If you go here, you can just get attacked again. Same thing here, as well as you run into tactics. If you go back home, obviously black has an advantage. And if you jump it in the center, you can immediately hang a pawn, or even worse. So e4 is a hugely strong move, I feel like. Black does not, he seems to also be underestimating. Whenever you're able to push a pawn and kick a knight in the center, I'm not saying automatically do it, but you should definitely calculate the move, because he has to move the knight from its best squares, so it might be a really good move. So anyway, black goes bishop g4. What does this threaten? It threatens an attack on the knight, which would double the pawns. Also, he can still push e4, but he could have done that last turn. And now black has 3 minor pieces out, a pawn in the center. White, 1 minor piece out, a queen here. You know, a c3 pawn takes away the square from the knight. You're never going to get d4 in at this point. So even though, let's say the eval says minus 0.3, black slightly better, I think practically speaking it's extremely hard to play for white from here. And if he played e4 last move, it would have been even harder. So basically here, your main problems that you need to understand is this central control and central pushes black has. Again, he can push this pawn, which would really discoordinate your pieces and give him a lot of activity, give him moves like knight e5. It would really be bad for you. And I think both of you guys maybe not understand it. So it's important to address this e4 pawn. And so what do? You move the knight. So what does this threaten? I'm guessing you want to remove it from the attack and place it on a central square like this. That makes sense. However, I think you're also, it's very advanced, I would say, but you're going here probably to avoid the trade, but if he takes your knight and you recapture, now that f3 pawn, I get that your king side looks horrible in theory, but this pawn that's on f3 would then be controlling this e4 square from the pawn push. So that would actually be an extremely helpful pawn. I get it's double isolated. Your king's here. Um, but I think that's why I think instead of, let's say, knight g5, you really should be preventing this and, let's say, playing d3. So a move like d3, it immediately will stop this, meaning you don't have to move the knight because you can capture. Also, if he takes, you go here, and there is no more push. There's no knight jumps. This can't jump in the center. This isn't maybe here, but what's the big deal? You're actually not under attack, and after you put your bishop here, knight somewhere, you can long castle. Your position's actually really solid and nice. And so, but even with, like, I just want you to see that d3 is important to play. One, so your pawn's longer backwards. Two, because it's also going to be important to get this bishop to e3 quickly, and solidify your position, get your pieces out, and stop, again, primarily e4. But you jump here, which is logical in a sense. But he can kind of kick it, but I guess you want to go here anyway, is your argument. The thing is, once you get there, it's not really, like, it's nice in the center, but he'll just take it probably. So black, he goes back. This is fine move. It makes perfect sense. You want to solidify it with these pawns and also take control of the center and this diagonal with tempo on the queen. It looks like black kind of has a very strong position. Knight e4. I mean, that was all part of your plan, so it makes sense. Black can probably take it. I mean, you're not threatening anything. It's just a nice move. The thing is, you're just moving the same piece so many times. You're just so undeveloped. And then you need to move a pawn to develop a bishop, so it just takes so much time. That's really what's getting me about all the white moves here. So you jump in the center, fine. He doesn't take your knight, which is interesting because it brings the queen more into the center, gives you more fun moves. I mean, I don't know. Black could also just develop his queen and castle long, but he decides to pin the knight and attack it a second time, threatening to win the knight. That's the threat. So again, white should well, let's see what he does before I say. So white takes the knight, which is probably a decent option because it's hanging. You don't really want to play f3, obviously, but you do kind of want to play d3, and you've been wanting to play it, or I've been wanting to play it this whole time, solidifying the center a little bit and opening up the dark square bishop and the knight as well. So d3 is a good move here, but this is another way to get out of this pin. The thing is, it doesn't like advance your position any, right? Queen's gonna take and your position's the same. Black's a little better developed. At least d3, it's like some type of advancement or improvement on your position. Like it does something. If you just remove the knight from the board, it's just the same position. So anyway, you take, he takes, and now black just looks kind of crushing almost. It's weird that well, it says it's 0.7. I guess that makes sense. I would expect to be up a pawn here once I long castle, so. As white, queen a4. Okay, so with black's last move, what's the threat? The threat is the queen's hanging, because this came with check, he had to address it. So you have to move the queen or interpose. Bishop d3, walks into e4, probably not the brightest. d3 makes the most sense, again, for the reasons I mentioned previously. Also, it's protected by the bishop, opens up everything. And now that his queen is here, in addition to your queen being hit, it also eyes this f2 pawn. And you don't have a knight. You don't have a knight on f3. You also don't have any pieces developed, literally nothing. So Your dark squares are kind of precarious. So you move your queen, but I feel like d3 was still the move, because now that you move your queen, what's the threat? There is no threat. This pin doesn't matter because you don't have any, that pressure you had with the knight before. And it moves it further away from the king side. Excuse me. Further away from the king side. And it doesn't develop a piece. It doesn't improve your position again. I really don't like it. I like d3. I'm assuming that you looked at long castle and thought that pawn might be weak, but it's attacked twice. It's currently defended twice. He can't attack it again with a piece. If he wants to push the pawn, then you can finally trade. And your move here would be something like this, solidifying and developing, trying to castle one way or the other. But you moved your queen out. But now I feel like he can apply pressure, and he does it in the strongest way possible. With bishop c5, coordinating on the dark squares. The only piece you have that can defend that is this. And so this is a devastating move. You would want to be able to play something like d4 here, to try to block it, but he'll take, you'll take, he'll take, and it's probably even worse for you because your king's open to his rooks. So it's just there's really nothing here. There's nothing you can do. The game is over because you can't defend this pawn. And it's not that you lose a pawn, it's that his queen's gonna be here. And it's not like you're gonna be castling anytime soon. So without calculating, it looks completely lost, I would say. I didn't even consider f3, which is kind of funny, because my brain doesn't consider moves like this. That's so weird. I guess technically it is the only way to defend the pawn without hanging your queen. Okay, so kudos to you for finding it, but something about this looks extremely fishy. And again, as black this whole time I've been wanting to play e4. This kind of encourages it because you can't take because the queen comes again. But black says, you know what, my king still in the center. I'm ready to 1700. I should be able to castle by move, I don't know, 11. So he says, let me get my king safe first, and then maybe I'll attack or do something. So white is in a desperate situation here, no doubt. I would be like, oh man, e4 is coming. I don't know what to do. I'm losing. This is the way I would feel if this was my tournament game. e4 is coming. What to do? Oops. How do you even stop it? Now d3, e4. Well, this is hanging, but that looks kind of fishy. So yeah, I don't really see a good way to stop e4. And if you can't stop e4, your king's going to be open. If you can't stop e4, your next thing in your head would be like, okay, I can't stop e4. I want to be castled as soon as possible, but this blocks this diagonal, so you're not going anywhere. You might just d6 is still your best move, just sack the pawn and get your pieces out, but you go b4 with an attack on the bishop, and he has to move the bishop. But he might not even have to, but let's just say he moves it, no big deal. And now you start developing your pieces, knight first. I mean, I guess you don't really have a choice. Like, you don't have any moves here. You have to bring something out. You have to bring a bishop out, and your knight out like you did. Yeah, it's really rough. You can't even run with your king because of this bishop. So knight a3, because what else? And now he finally opens the center. Makes a lot of sense. Bishop e2. I guess it makes sense. You don't really have, like I said, you don't have moves here, and you're not going to have moves for the rest of the game. So almost everything you do will be equivalent in a way. So you go here, it controls the, it doesn't control, it blocks the e-file from the rook. But I'm assuming he's just going to take an open anyway, which he should, because open lines towards the enemy king is principled. You have to recapture, probably with the bishop. And now your king is wide open. He throws a check in. I mean, now you're in severe trouble. It's basically, you know, it's definitely game over, assuming he doesn't blunder. Because look at this. And these pieces don't actually do anything because well defended. So black jumps his knight in the center. What does this threaten? Threatens to take the bishop and have to recapture check with the fork. It also threatens to clamp down on the position and start creating some type of mating nets and this move. So it's a good attacking move. White goes rook e1. What does this threaten? Well, it's a kind of clever move because if black just, you know, obliviously follows along with his plan, knight takes bishop, maybe you have the intermezzo rook takes rook, and if rook takes rook, queen takes rook, that's a free rook, but a free exchange. After the queen blocks, you take, king takes, white will take the knight, free rook. So it's a trap. So it basically prevents this knight from moving to either of its desirable squares, so it makes sense. And I'm happy white developed a piece. So black sees the threat. He sees that this double pressure is a little precarious. Maybe he doesn't want to play c6 to stop it. That's fair. So he just goes rook e6, removing that threat. The rook is now defended. Maybe even opens possibilities of doubling, but probably not because it doesn't really make sense. He might want to stay on the e-files, makes more sense. White has no moves, so knight b5. Okay, it threatens the pawn. Maybe it threatens to go in the center. I'm extremely curious what black does here because his position is crazy. Like, he moved the rook out of the way, so now he can move the knight again, right? It frees it up. So white goes in, so now he has a free hand to jump his knight in. Or, the thing is, if he jumps his knight in, he may blunder something here. And he has this move king b8, which when you castle queenside, you always go king b1, king b8, because that immediately just stops everything, and there's nothing anymore. And black's position is just completely overwhelming. So if he goes king b8 here, yeah, it's not the forcing checkmate win. Yeah, it goes from -17 to -9 or something. But this move, white resigns. That's the difference. You play king b8 here, white resigns. I mean, he's not going to actually resign, but in his head he will. Instead, let's see. Instead, black goes for the somewhat forcing move, knight d3. I say somewhat forcing because at least taking the bishop, you take a piece and hit a rook. That's pretty forcing. In this one, you don't take a piece and you hit a rook, so it's a little less forcing. And it's not as forcing as a check, right, which white does have available. So you always have to consider that. So black, he goes for the kill, which I like. Although king b8 is just like the move you should make, like with 5 seconds on your clock. So white takes the rook, maybe to try to relieve some pressure from his position. Now that this is threatened, rook takes rook, check. So he takes. I'm assuming you're going to take the rook. Okay. So again, black's position is overwhelming. What does queen recapture threaten? Well, it threatens queen e1 check, which would force the king here. And it would allow knight discoveries. That can't be good. At the very least, you can win this bishop with that discovery, or you can win the queen. So that's the threat. White goes knight takes a7. It comes with a check, so that's something. You can't do this yet. Now, as black, you have a couple options. I feel like if you take and the queen takes, right? Yes, the queen has access to this square, which probably won't do anything. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is if you take and recapture, the real problem isn't queen a8. The real problem is it coordinates with another piece. And so you better be damn sure, if you're going to recapture right now, that this doesn't lead to a losing position for you. Very simply, white just took a pawn, but you're about to destroy him and take his queen. So you can easily play king b8 here. Say, pawn is yours. No coordination here. Your knight's not doing anything. And I'm going to checkmate you next. That's the, like, probably a better way to play. But black takes this. So white recaptures back. And now we have queen check. We have bishop check. The one downside to this whole operation is it's not forcing once queen a7 hits the board. It's black's turn, and black has queen e1 check, which is devastating. So basically queen e1 check, king has to move over. Now you don't have the winning the queen line because the queen moved, but you at the very least have the king goes here, the winning the bishop line. So the king is in blue. The king has to go to b2 because the knight covers this, the bishop covers this. Queen would take check, king goes here, queen would take check, king goes here. You don't really have to calculate anything after that. So queen e1 is looks winning. Wait, what? He takes the bishop? I'm not sure. Like, this is a super awesome attacking piece. What am I missing? Like, if the queen was, let's say, somewhere else, you even have checkmate with knight f2. And you have this check, but instead of doing those obvious moves, like, I feel like queen e1 is super obvious for 1700. Even if you don't see anything but winning the bishop, I don't know, this looks very panicky. I'm gonna guess he had like 30 seconds on his clock or something, because this is a super makes no sense move. Like I had 5 seconds on my clock. This makes no sense at all. And so yeah, you go for the free pawn with the bishop. Okay, he has to go here. You don't have good follow-up checks. So probably take with the queen makes a little more sense, just because when he runs here, your queen's not in such a weird position. You could do something like this if he can't interpose because of these ideas. Not that one, but basically the c6 square would be weak. If he goes this way, I don't know. At least you can bring your queen closer to the center before recapturing. Leave your bishop on this strong protected square. And I don't know, it just gives more options for him to blunder, I feel like. Unless you see something like mating, I wouldn't put my bishop here. I like it where it is, around my king. It also, you know, it protects some stuff too. But you take with the bishop, he's forced to move. But now you don't really have good follow-up, but he did give you his best piece, or his most attacking piece, that was setting up all the real threats. I mean, he still has good pieces, but giving this away was insane. Yeah, taking with the king, of course, is going to walk into queen e1 and the same line we looked at before where he just gobbles all your pawns. So yeah, you have to take with the rook. And now that black doesn't have the knight, it's a lot harder for him to do stuff. Like, he'll probably want to get his king out of the way, I imagine. And he probably has to go again. He'll want to. It's going to be hard, a lot harder for him without that knight. So, and if he trades too much stuff, you actually have this outside pass pawn. So that's interesting. But clearly, his bishop and the way where your king is gives him an advantage. So that's the game. Oh no, that's not the game. You went. You took with the. You took with the king. He gave you this check, and then he checkmates you. Yeah, then he checkmates you. So I think it's important to see that even if it looks like, you know, this was your mistake, or this, I don't know, this was your mistake. Like whatever you think your mistake was in this game, like in here or whatever, your real mistake is queen c2. This will lose you the game all of the time, just because of the positions it leads to and black's dominance in the center. So if you're gonna play this, it's only move 4. Moves 1, 2, and 3 are, you don't need to memorize them because you know that's the start of the opening. So your memorization, the first move of your memorization actually begins on move 4, let's say, right? So if you know 4 moves of theory, you should really be at move 7 because you know it starts with this. So you really want to remember queen a4 on d5. So basically, if you play the Ponziani, black here will have 2 moves which attack your center, e4 pawn. That's d5 and knight f6. And then they have all their other moves. And like a quick cheat guide is, if black goes d5, you go queen a4, fighting for the center, attacking both central pawns. If black does not go d5 and does basically anything else, you go d4 and you have the pawns in the center. So since he did d5, you have to go a4. So it's important to know this, and it's very important to know that there are no good discoveries. Queen d1, you're fine. So if you're going to play an opening that involves the queen move early, try to know like 5 moves of theory after the first starting position. So that's about it. I hope some of this helps. Center is extremely important. Every move you make should be considered in light of the center. Thank you for the submission. Feel free to submit more rapid or longer time control games. Good luck in your games, guys. Goodbye.